Good day, everyone, especially to our panelists, Dr. Glenn Ampolocchio, our research advisor, and to Dr. Ed Privilegiatorion, our Canton expert, and to Ma'am Rojobi Hermano Hinugin, our research statistician. Let me present to you our research title, Students' Perception on the Use of Google Classroom to Support Blended Learning for Better Course. The proponents of this research are Dario Riputana, Julian Espinosa, Eileen Herodias, Aichel Oclementissima, and Jaya Coquelia. Yours truly, Evelyn Saga.
Perceptions denote the way an individual views the world. In other words, perceptions are processes in which an individual becomes aware of and interprets a situation in a way that he or she understands it, which may differ from the next person. LMS is a digital teaching and learning platform for the administration, documentation, tracking, reporting, and delivering a curriculum blogs or social media. LMS facilitates teachers and students to exchange office documents, distribute audio-video podcasts, conduct an online discussion, consultation, and give an online assessment. Google Classroom is another blended learning platform that has appeared in 2014 and it came into prominence in 2017. Ever since, Google changed its policies from institutional use into individual use. The recent policy enables anybody with a Google account to create a virtual classroom using Classroom for educational purpose. Educational system worldwide has been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, leading to the near total closures of schools and colleges. Most governments around the world have temporarily closed educational institutions in order to restrain the spread of COVID-19. This requires all elements of education to adapt and continue teaching learning process. This paper aimed at investigating the students' perception on effectiveness of Google Classroom in supporting learning process in a higher education setting by using the classroom as an LMS for blended learning approach to better led course in Southern Leyte State University main campus.
Currently, there are still few researches in the Philippines about the impact of using virtual learning environment in the fields of education and student learning. Therefore, it is interesting to note how students perceived on virtual learning environment like the use of Google Classroom, especially when it comes to their comprehension, retention, and learning motivation on their courses. The aims of this study are the following. One is to know the participants' perceptions about the use of Google Classroom as LMS to better lead course according to ease of access, communication, and interaction, usefulness, and student satisfaction. Second, to know their perceptions regarding the advantages and disadvantages in using the said LMS. And lastly, to reveal participants' view on utilizing Google Classroom as a classroom collaboration tool. Hypothesis. Google Classroom as LMS is useful and suitable to support blended learning. Null hypothesis. There is no significance of using Google Classroom as LMS in terms of ease of access, communication and interaction tool, perceived usefulness, and student satisfaction.
Figure 1 shows the flow of the operation processes of the study. First is understanding Google Classroom as an LMS to support blended learning. Next is to conduct online survey on Betaland student on Google Classroom as LMS to support blended learning in terms of ease of use as collaborative tool, student satisfaction, perceived usefulness, and the advantages and disadvantages. After it is being conducted, the data is collected and analyzed. Data were analyzed manually to identify significant themes that were generated from the raw data. Hence, all data were viewed repetitively to identify the potential meanings of the raw data. Before relevant themes were developed, lastly, the results are presented and concluded.
Research design. We, as the researchers, we use a descriptive qualitative research approach to describe how BTLED students felt about using Google Classroom to promote blended learning in this study. This includes tabulation and display of findings in frequency and mean, as well as the results from the questionnaire. This research method can be used to learn how BTLED students think about and use Google Classroom. In research respondent, the study's target respondents were BTLED students at Southern Leyte State University main campus who had used the Google Classroom application as a blended learning tool during the COVID-19 pandemic outbreak, notably in the BTLED Industrial Arts and Home Economics classes. In regards of conducting a survey, 52 students enrolled in a Betel Ed course participated in this study. There were 9 males and 15 males in Betel Ed Industrial Arts for a total of 24 participants, and 1 male and 27 females in Betel Ed Home Economics for a total of 28 respondents.
For our research instrument and techniques, a researcher-made questionnaire is used to obtain the data in regards with the students' perception on the use of Google Classroom to support blended learning in Bachelor of Technology and Livelihood Education program, specifically the Industrial Arts and Home Economics with the use of Google Forms. Researchers' questionnaire was composed of 3 parts. Part 1 for the student's profile. Part 2 are the participants' perception towards the use of Google Classroom to support blended learning according to ease of use, communication and interaction, usefulness, and students' satisfaction. Part 3 is of the perceptions regarding the advantages and disadvantages in using the said LMS. The items of the questionnaires were measured in 4-point scale ranging from 4 to 1, wherein 4 is strongly agree, 3 is agree, 2 is disagree, and strongly disagree is 1. For our data gathering procedure, the researchers constructed a survey questionnaire validated by the advisor, then the survey questionnaire will be distributed. The researchers used survey questionnaire from Shaharani, Zamil, and Rodsey 2018 as a reference. However, modifications on the statements were made by the researcher to locally contextualize the instrument. After the respondents answer the questionnaire, the researcher collects and tally the data for interpretation. The researchers ask a statistician to help in determining the appropriate statistical tools to be used and interpreting the data. Based on the data, researchers comes up with conclusion and recommendations to this study. Convenience sampling was used in selecting the participants. This is, according to Crossman 2020, defined that convenience sampling as a non-probability sample chosen depending on on the demographic characteristics and the study's goal. For our data analysis procedure, in order to answer research objective 1, mean, average, and percentile were employed. Results will be presented using bar graphs and charts from the Microsoft Excel for ease of interpretation and discussion. Moreover, Research Objective 3 was answered using frequency count, mean, and rank. Tables were utilized for the presentation of collected data. Finally, for the Research Objective 3, inferential statistics were employed. And lastly, inductive process was conducted To answer research question 3, data were analyzed manually to identify significant themes that were generated from the raw data. Hence, all data were reviewed repetitively to identify the potential meanings of the raw data before the relevant themes were developed.
As you can see in the table, the data presented students' perception of Google Classroom ease of access. In this area, resulted an overall mood of 3, which means Bedelid students agree that Google Classroom found easy to access in terms of accessing information, announcement, notification, and update. It also is in terms of submitting outputs and assignments, navigating the system, as well as accessing quizzes and learning activities. Furthermore, Berlin students agree that Google Classroom is accessible due to easy signing in the said learning platform. And here is our table 1.2. The data presented in table 1.2 is a perception of students in regards of communication and interaction using Google Classroom. The data get the overall mood of 3, which means Bedelid students agree that they are comfortable in using Google Classroom for conversation and engagement purpose for learning. And this is the table 1.3. The data showed students' response of Google Classroom perceived usefulness. In this area, resulted overall mood of 4 means students strongly agree that Google Classroom was useful to students. Google Classroom was used in interaction to submit assignments and download review materials. The professor can easily give feedback and monitor to students' performance, subject objective assessment and content become clear with the aid of Google Classroom. And here is the table 1.4. The data showed a consistent response on evaluating Google Classroom according to student satisfaction. The students agreed that Google Classrooms allows to meet personal goal and subject expectations. Google Classroom is a good technique that could be used to any subject. Students also prepare Google Classroom as an active learning tool and a motivation booster compared to Moodle or Facebook Messenger. You can see this is the table 1.5. Based on the data collected, the overall mood response of students on the advantage of Google Classroom is 3, with a description agree. Students agree that Google Classroom allows them to interact, participate, and access reference material easily. Google Classroom motivates students to learn about the course, manage monitor tasks, assignments, projects, announcements, and lesson material. Feedback on the submitted output is personal. On the other hand, students strongly agree that Google Classroom is very convenient to use, especially in submitting tasks, quizzes, course activities, and gives option to resubmit or revise outputs before the deadline. And lastly, this is the table 1.6 presents the university students' evaluation of Google Classroom as to its perceived disadvantage. The data resulted the highest overall mood of 2, which to say that Google Classroom is disagreed to be disadvantage on students as a tool in blended learning. In contrast, students agreed to be disadvantaged of Google Classroom to the statement that Google Classroom is not a replacement for standalone video, especially in meetings. However, the respondents strongly agree that students with no access on the internet could be left behind, especially on the course activities and discussion in Google Classroom. This statement suggests that internet connection is essential for students, especially in remote area.
According to the findings, Google Classroom is a good and effective LMS solution for supporting blended learning, since it allows students to improve their learning through active involvement in online discussion and tasks, and it is easy to use for purposeful learning. It also demonstrates that Betalit students are happy with Google Classroom. The most significant point is that Google Classroom appears to be fantastic learning platform that is so simple to use that observation and data suggest a high level of participant acceptance and reaction. Furthermore, the majority of the respondents believe that Google Classroom is an effective learning tool for supplementing face-to-face talks as well as good collaboration platform for students and teachers. However, there are also disadvantages using Google Classroom. It is because some students live in remote area, can access that platform, and it is not a replacement for standalone videos such as meetings. Furthermore, the researchers urge that if the situation improves and you are able to have a complete face-to-face session, you should use Google Classroom to have a more productive and successful learning experience. Knowing that Google Classroom makes customizing coursework for individual students or small groups a breeze. Specific students or groups in a class can be given modified or different assignments. You can also check and with a student individually to see if they have any queries or require additional assistance. The Google Classroom is primarily useful for students to benefit from the experience and talents of their peers online, particularly in terms of increasing components of social learning education. The advantages of the Google Classroom also help students to communicate indefinitely, and thus, this learning platform should be utilized in every school, especially in Southern Leyte State University, to strengthen and improve blended learning. The researchers also persuade that students should use Google Classroom properly and creatively because the way students use a tool is what makes the difference. The way the students properly use Google Classroom can make learning better, more engaging, and more student centered. For teachers, they should put exemption and extend understanding for those students who are in remote area where the said learning platform is not accessible. The last, the current study offers recommendation for further study. As this present study only focused on population of beta students, hopefully next study can continue this research on the other department. Thus, it can get more varied data and it can improve blended learning in Southern Leyte State University.